The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, thank you everybody for joining us today. We appreciate you taking some time to join us for this presentation on emergency remote teaching in a crisis situation. I just want to take a quick minute to introduce myself and our presenter today. My name is Nate Reese. I'm the Digital Marketing Coordinator for the National Association of EMS Educators. Our presenter today is Rob Theriault. Rob's the Immersive Technology Lead at Georgian College in Ontario. He's been working with remote learning technology for over 20 years, very experienced. And so I want to say a huge thank you to Rob for taking the time to give us this presentation today. We'll be asking some interactive questions throughout the presentation. They'll pop up on your screen as we go. They're just a quick yes or no question to give us a little bit of reference of your guys' experience and how you've been working with this type of technology. We have a handout available for reference in the handouts window that if you'd like to look and follow along on the slides as we go, that could be helpful. And then also feel free to ask questions in the questions panel. All of those will come through to us in text message or text form, and we'll have a short Q&A and try to address those at the end of this presentation so that we can get all of you guys' questions answered. As always, we'll send out a recording of this to everybody who's registered, and it'll have the handout included, and it'll have contact information for both NAEMSE and for Rob so that you guys can reach out after the presentation if you have further questions or if you'd like to get in touch. But without further ado, I'd like to hand this over to Rob Theriault.
Thanks very much, Nate. Hi, everybody. Just for reference, my last name is pronounced Theriault like Ontario, which coincidentally is where I'm from in Canada. And I'm grateful to be here to talk with you. And first of all, I want to say, for those of you who are still on the road and providing frontline care, you have my deepest respect and my heartfelt wishes for a safe journey. I retired from the road a year ago after having a STEMI. And no worries, I'm doing really well. And but it was time because I'd been on the road for 35 years, and I was also working full-time as an educator and part-time as a paramedic out in the field, doing about 5 shifts a month. So I'm kind of grateful now to be off the road and to have dodged the bullet. Albeit I have dreams at night of being called into back to work as they're pulling retired nurses and physicians back to work. It's funny, I don't know what it is, but I have these recurring dreams where I'm going back on shift, and for some reason I'm always forgetting something to bring to my shift. So I'll go in with my uniform but forget my boots, or go in with my uniform but I'll be wearing my jeans, which has never happened in 35 years. So I don't know why I'm having those sorts of dreams, which is really odd. But anyway, I've been teaching full time for 20 years, and I've been teaching more or less since the start of my career. I'm a formal critical care flight paramedic. I spent 10 years on the Air Ambulance helicopter in Toronto, Ontario, and I've been using technology almost since the beginning of my teaching career. It's always been an interest of mine, and I did a master's degree in educational technology, and I run ed tech workshops with Doug Godomsky, who many of you know, at the NAEMSE conferences, and I hope that somebody will come out and maybe attend one of those workshops. Now, this is, I call this emergency remote teaching because a lot of my colleagues who are in the online learning business, said, make no mistake, this is not online learning in the robust evidence-based best practices framework. It's really emergency remote teaching, and so people are who've never taught online before, kind of winging it. And it's unfortunate it came to this, but this is a really great opportunity for people to learn how to modify, adjust, and improve on their remote teaching capabilities. Now, some of you may be fairly new to educational technology. Some of you are seasoned veterans and are just hoping, maybe Rob will say something that I haven't heard before. So I hope so. Hope you get a couple of pearls out of this. I'll just tell you that this webinar is not so much a how-to, it's more of a what and a why. So first and foremost, I would preface everything by saying that, let me see if I can advance my slides here. Okay, there we Okay, so well, first I'm gonna talk about webcasting, screencasting, learning management systems, and I'm gonna wrap up with virtual reality. But I want to preface all of this by saying probably the most important thing you can do as an educator who's new to teaching remotely is to take baby steps. So, you know, learn one technology, get comfortable with it. If you're already good with one technology, I would try to stick to it and maybe adapt one at a time, and not push yourself too quickly and try to do too much. You know, I work at a community college where we run 2 paramedic programs. So in Canada, just for reference, for those of you who are not familiar with our system, if I don't say EMT, it's because we don't have EMTs in Canada. We have 3 paramedic levels. We have primary care paramedic, which is a 2-year full-time program. It's the entry to practice. It's actually going to a 3-year program soon. Then we have advanced care paramedic, which is a 3rd year, and that's equivalent in scope of practice to EMTP. And then critical care, which is a 4th year. And so we've had to finish off the last, I think it's 5 weeks of the semester online, and some of our instructors were quite new to online, so I've been assisting them. But if you're in the same situation where you're, and maybe I'm speaking a little too late, but I would try to go easy with the students, especially the ones who are finishing up their program and you're confident that they're good at what they do. You know, obviously we have to meet accreditation standards and we can't compromise in that way, but my daughter is in pre-health in college, and some of her instructors have been pretty good. They've been going a little easy on them. Some of them have gone over the top and given them additional assignments and you know, final exams that are worth 50%. And we actually have a policy at our college where no exam can be over 35% of the overall mark. So take baby steps is what I would say. So I'm going to talk first about webcasting, and this is probably the low-hanging fruit for emergency remote teaching, is to just take a lecture and put it into a webcast. And I'm going to give you a poll question here because I'm curious to know how many people are currently doing polls. So let me just find this here. So I'm going to share this with you and get you to respond to that question about how many of you are currently webcasting. I'm hoping, Nate, are you able to see the poll? I'm just hoping everyone else is able to see it.
Yeah, I'm viewing it, but I'm afraid that it might be closed already. The particular question that was.
Oh, right, because we asked that question. So the question was, how many of you are currently webcasting? Yeah, Nate and I tried this out in the beginning, so I'm getting so far 0 yeses and 0 nos. So we'll just close this one down for now, and dock it there again. So anyway, so much for that poll. We'll try the next poll. It sort of leads into my next statement that you know the quickest way to anesthetize your audience is to run a webinar with everyone muted. You know, I call webcast the ketamine of online learning because you know, your students may look awake, but they're really not there. Let me just go back to the next slide here. Okay. There we go. Okay. Yeah. I'll let you read that slide. So let's talk about some webcasting tools. I don't know if you're able to hide the one screen there to enable you to see the entire slide, but there are a number of webcasting platforms. Some of them are free, some of them are at cost. Zoom right now and GoToMeeting are offering webcasting at for free for up to 100 participants, which is really good. I've used Google Hangouts quite a bit. I've used Blackboard Collaborate quite a bit. And WizIQ is one you may not be familiar with. WizIQ is actually an entire learning management system and includes a live on learning platform as well. And it's pretty good. I used it for 2 years. So there are lots of different platforms available. And I think So webcasting is essentially just doing what I'm doing right now. So just broadcasting your PowerPoint slides to your students. And, you know, to be able to do that, so first of all, your students should have a headset. So there's, you're minimizing any echo effect that happens when the sound of the teacher comes through their computer and then goes back through their microphone. And so that means that while they're muted, you have to think about how you're going to engage those students. And I'll talk about that just in just a second. But some of the questions you want to ask yourself about a webcasting platform is, does it have a recording function? So if your students are not able to make it to the session, can they view it later? Can you upload it to YouTube as either an unlisted or listed screencast, if you will? Does it have a polling function? Are you able to draw on it? Are there digital objects, or can you bring in digital objects? That's always fun. So if you want students to put some objects in sequence or in order, you can give them that functionality and allow them to drag and drop objects. Not all webcasting platforms have that functionality. You want to know that from the student's perspective, that the screen is fairly clear. And the other thing I do is I will tell the students what I recommend for a webcasting platform for them to get together live online without me. Because I can tell you, I have 2 degrees and they were both done online. So I've never actually been to either of my universities. One was in Melbourne, Australia. The other was University of British Columbia on the West Coast. And so I feel deprived of the campus experience. But my point is that learning online using an asynchronous format is a very isolated experience. And so if you're doing webcasting, great. If you have a little bit of asynchronous material for the students, great. But what you also want to do is have the students connect, and they connect, you know, via other social media like Facebook, and they usually have these clandestine groups, you know, on Facebook. But connecting together via Google Hangouts is great because you know, it helps address those Maslow hierarchy of needs. I found in my master's degree, even just being able to speak to other students to realize I wasn't the only one who had difficulty understanding assignment was a great relief. So I would definitely make those recommendations. Now, ideally, you want to, if the webcasting platform you're using doesn't have some interactive component to it, like a polling function, then you've got alternatives. And we got another poll question here. So I'm going to try to use it. And hopefully this one will work. Let's see. Okay, polls 1 out of 5. Stand by. Here we go. Launching the poll. Let's see how this works. Hopefully you can see it. Oh, wait a minute. There we go.
That one works perfectly.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some amazing numbers here. Beautiful. I think we've reached the end here. So collecting responses. Oh, wait a minute. Still a few more coming in.
I can go ahead and close it out if you'd like, or
yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to display the results. If anyone's able to type into the message section, let us know if you actually see the results. Oh, wait a minute. There was a share function that just came up. Results.
They should be visible to everyone now. We're at 71 yes, 20
yep.
no.
Yep, good. So it sounds like most of you are using some sort of interactive system, which is great. That's the evidence shows very clearly that the best way to engage students and to improve learning is to use some sort of activity that involves them, and using formative tools is one way to do that. The other option too, you know, under the current circumstances, is to actually give some currency to that interaction. So actually give them some points. The only downside to that is if someone's unwell and they can't attend a live webinar and participate, then you've got to work out some sort of alternative to that. So let me just move on to the next slide here. So there we go. The other thing that I like doing with live webcasts as well is doing some case-based learning. So we have a learning management system, and I'll ask you in a minute how many of you have a learning management system. But if you don't, you can certainly share cases with the students, and then when you meet live online, you can do some case-based learning. And a couple of things about case-based learning. I'm a real fan of QR codes. I know QR codes are kind of the Rodney Dangerfield of educational technology. For those of you not old enough to know who Rodney Dangerfield, he was a comedian whose motto was, "I get no respect." But QR codes save on real estate, which is great. So this is sort of a clip of a case that I would give my students. There's, you know, chief complaint and history of presenting illness in there as well. You just don't see it. And what I do with those links is I link them to images. Say you have a car crash or a GSW, so we can talk about ballistics. And if you're wondering who's this Canadian guy to talk about ballistics, you would be right. In 35 years, I've seen just under a dozen GSWs, and most of them were hunting related. So yeah, not like some of you hardcore medics in some of the big cities in the United States. But you know, a hole is a hole. You know, you plug it and you assess everywhere else to see if it took a path, a bad path, and then you get them to surgery. But getting back to my point here. For the QR codes, I'll use that to take them to a storage site like Google Docs or like OneDrive, where they can see an image of an ECG or something like that. I also like to use cardiac simulators. So if you have the luxury of having iSimulate and you happen to have it at home with you, even better. So you can put a simulator on your webcast. Or you can use DartSim, which is one that's free that I like to use sometimes. I'm going to show you this little clip. So this is a clip of me scanning a QR code on my phone. And there's no voice to this, so I'll just explain. So I'm using a scan app, but if you have an iOS device, just the camera function works. You just hover it over a QR code and a link to Safari will come up. And you just tap on it and boom, your image comes up. And then of course you can zoom in on certain parts and scale it down. Now we're looking at a 12 lead. Not everyone teaches EMTP level. I can appreciate that. So yeah, let's move on to the next slide. So the next thing, so webcasting is one way to communicate with your students during social distancing. Another is to create screencasts, and these are really great to present material that you want the students to learn in advance, or you might do all your online learning using screencasts and maybe some case-based learning exercises. That's acceptable as well. I think that's my opinion. I don't know, depends on what your agency or your school wants, but screencasting is essentially defined as doing a video recording of your computer screen, typically with you narrating some information like a narrated set of slides. And the evidence would suggest that the ideal screencast is 30 to 60 seconds, although it would take you a lifetime to create, you know, enough material in 30 to 60 seconds. But there is some evidence that suggests 5 to 6 minutes. And I would say no more than 15 minutes. But it depends too on whether you're just doing a straight you know, lecture, sort of like I'm doing right now, or whether you're making it interactive. So I'm just going to drop down another poll again here. Let's bring this up and just see how many of you are screencasting. Okay. So this is also great for flipping the classroom, where you present core material in a screencast, and then when you're live online with them, you're doing all case-based learning, which I really love to do. I started doing that many years ago. Actually, I started doing it in 1999 with PowerPoint, actually narrated PowerPoint slides where you could embed audio into each slide and then put it on a CD. This was even before DVDs. And so the poll responses we've got so far, we got 79 who voted, and we're at 58% who say no, they do not screencast. But it's really quite easy to screencast. And let me see if I can close that and I'll share it. There we go. It's been shared. and then I'll tuck that away. So a little under half of you are screencasting, which is great. And I would just practice screencasting, give it a shot. And there are some free screencasting tools. Let me just go to those. Screencast-O-Matic is one of my favorites. It's free. There is a paid version, which is quite good. And it enables you to screencast with just your slides or with an image of you in the bottom corner. Now, I'll just tell you that the evidence shows that seeing the instructor in a screencast does not add value to the learning. It does not improve learning, which is good news because I don't like showing my face when I'm doing a screencast anyway. But if you wanted to add something else to that instead of your image, maybe an image of a piece of equipment or something, that might be of value. Snagit is one of my favorites. It's a TechSmith product, and it's I think it's $29 USD per year. It's dirt cheap, and there's some other ones, Elucidat and iSpring. And you'll notice at the end of the handout that there's a link to some resources. So I strung together a whole bunch of resources on screencasting and webcasting and so on for you to take a look through, and there's also my email contact there. Interactivity, as I said before, is a key, right? If you're doing a webcast, interactivity is important to keep your students from slipping into a coma. If you're doing screencasting, interactivity is important as well. So the only other way to know, if you're doing screencasting and you're putting it up on YouTube, you can look at the analytics on YouTube, but you'll just have an idea of how many views that video got. You'll have no idea who viewed the video. If you're embedding them into your learning management system, if you happen to have a learning management system, fantastic. Then you'll have a sense of who's viewing the videos. But if you really want the students to engage with the videos, you need to make them interactive. You can do that with programs like Edpuzzle, Google Forms, and PlayPosit. And I'm just going to launch another poll here, asking you if you make your screencasts interactive. And whoops, here we go. Wait a second here. I'm not seeing any votes come in. So what's that?
If you just give me a moment, I believe we pressed it at the same time. I can add the poll again so we can ask this question.
Okay. Yeah. Probably better if just one of us plays with it.
Okay.
I can hear you just typing it in again. That's awesome. Okay, there we go. Okay, can I hit the share button?
Yeah, go ahead and you do it. I'll keep my hands off.
Okay, there we go. All right, I'm still not seeing any votes, which is a bad sign. So
there we go. That should be.
Distributing poll. Okay, here we go. So far what we're seeing is the majority of people do not make their screencasts interactive, which is not in the least bit surprising. I'm actually surprised that right now 25 to 30% make them interactive, which is really impressive. These are rock star online educators who are in the group. Okay, so I'm going to close that poll. We're at 78%, and I'm going to share those results. So 71% said no, 29% said yes, which is truly impressive. So let me just hide that function there. So interactive screencasts. The other thing to think about with screencasts is recording them. And so I record mine using, I record my screencast using Snagit predominantly, and other people use Screencast-O-Matic and so on and so forth, and then posting them up on YouTube. Some people call this a podcast. I just call it simply a screencast. But the other option, speaking of podcasts, is you could do audio podcasts. And one of the advantages of audio podcasts is people are more inclined to listen to podcasts while they're driving. I didn't mention this in my slides, but I use Anchor as a platform to broadcast my podcast. It gets sent out to a number of different platforms, including Spotify. So when I teach live in the classroom, face-to-face in my classroom, I record all of my lessons, including case studies. So we do a case and then we bring it up and we have group discussions, and I record those group discussions. So again, if you make your screencast interactive, that gives you some data on who's actually not only who's viewing the screencast, but also how their performance is. Do they understand the content? So LMSs, if you're lucky to work at an institution or an agency that has a learning management system, fantastic, because you can put everything there, including your syllabus and your course outline and your presentation notes and so on and so forth. There's a place called Course Sites, which is by Blackboard, and it's a free learning management system for up to 5 courses, and you can change those courses. So this is ideal for a small agency, you know, it has a minimum budget. WizIQ is probably the cheapest learning management system I have ever seen. I think we paid $130 per year for 25 participants. So obviously, if you got a larger service, it's going to cost you more. But in addition to being a learning management system, it's also has a webcasting platform as well, which I found worked quite well. So lastly, I want to talk about virtual reality, because this is probably going to play a significant role in the future of online learning moving forward. And not just online learning from a cognitive perspective, but also from a perspective in the affective domain and then the psychomotor domain. We integrated virtual reality into our, these are a couple of my students, into our paramedic lab in 2017 with patient simulation, teaching empathy, and we explored virtual reality as an online learning platform. I'm going to talk about online learning first. And as a result of that, our president and vice president invited me for a meeting and a conversation, and I pitched the idea that virtual reality should have some leadership attached to it so it can reach a threshold level of interest. And to my shock and amazement, they agreed. They posted the position, I applied for it and got it. So I'm now the immersive technology lead for the college, helping programs across all 7 campuses to integrate virtual reality into their curricula. And I say virtual reality, I'm not going to talk about augmented reality or mixed reality, because virtual reality is really the most advanced technology of this form at the moment. And virtual reality essentially means donning a head-mounted display like my student is wearing there, where you're completely immersed in another world. So let me talk first about online learning. So the first online learning experience I had in virtual reality was in a program called Engage in the bottom right. And the most remarkable thing for me was I felt like I was actually there with other people, which is very different from a video call, and very different from, you know, a call like we're having right now, where everyone's muted and I'm talking to myself wondering, is anyone actually listening? And in fact, when I was at this panel discussion in Engage, you know, I have an avatar. My avatar sat a little too close to this other guy, and I actually felt that feeling of discomfort when you get too close to someone. And I said, sorry about that, and I moved over, because Canadians say sorry. You guys say excuse me, if you weren't aware. But the one on the top left is a platform called AltSpace VR, and it's a Microsoft product. And I love AltSpace, one, because it's free, and 2, there are tons of educational events on there. In fact, if you look in on Facebook, there's a group called Educators in VR. If you're interested in virtual reality, I would encourage you to request to join Educators in VR. There's 2 questions you need to answer. Actually, I attended an event the other night about COVID-19, and it was given by a biomedical engineer who who is the lead in the new Netflix series Pandemic. So I got to watch that series now after hearing him speak. And he is doing cutting edge work developing synthetic antibodies. And he's able to produce antibodies for a novel virus within 4 to 6 weeks, which is faster than it's ever been done. It was just a fascinating talk, and it was just incredible knowing that I could go to these events and feel like I'm with other people. I could go up to him afterwards and have a conversation with him. It's really quite remarkable. Much better than an online webinar like we're doing now. And so there's some incredible opportunity to teach in virtual reality. Now, as you might imagine, the headsets are a little heavy, a little uncomfortable. A lot of people can't handle being in them for more than an hour. You do get used to them. I've spent 2 or 3 hours in them and don't find it too bad. There are other people who experience vertigo, and you do acclimatize to the environment, but there is about 2% of the population experience vertigo, and that's just sort of unavoidable. So virtual reality doesn't work for everyone. But AltSpace VR and Engage, these 2 platforms you're looking at now, they're also available on PC. AltSpace is only available on PC. Engage is available for PC or Mac. The future is going to be really interesting, because in the future you'll be able to go on to these, we call them spatial networks or social virtual reality. Spatial networks is probably a more appropriate term. And not only will you be able to see and talk to people, but you'll also be able to do things with your hands. They call that, in virtual reality, they call that agency. When you can do things, you learn. The other thing that's really cool about virtual reality is these platforms is they have spatial audio or 3D audio. That means if you and I and another person are having a conversation, 3 people further away in the corner of the room cannot hear our conversation, and we cannot hear their conversation. So like in real life, if you move away, and I've done this actually, I've been in conversation with 2 or 3 people and we could hear everyone else talking, and so let's move over to that corner there, just like you would do at a house party or something else. It's really something. And I've met some really brilliant people in AltSpace and Engage. The other thing that's really compelling in virtual reality is these empathy, they call them empathy applications, and they're empathy applications in a number of different areas. So for example, you can experience what it's like to have Alzheimer's, what it's like to be on the autism spectrum, what it's like to be embodied in an avatar that is not you, that is different, maybe a different ethnicity, different skin color, and you can experience firsthand what it's like to experience racism or cultural microaggressions. And that's truly powerful. And there's quite a bit of research on embodied cognition and empathy. And a great deal of it comes from Jeremy Bailenson and his team at the Virtual Human Interactive Lab at Stanford. The one at the bottom right corner is called Becoming Homeless, and it's a free application. It's 9 minutes long, and I'll just describe it briefly. You go into it and you feel like, so you're in an apartment and you're looking at an eviction notice because you lost your job about a month, 2 months ago, and you have no money, and a narrator tells you you need to sell things in your apartment to pay the rent. So you start pointing, clicking at things and selling them off, but you're not able to pay the rent. You get evicted. You find yourself in your car. You look around your car and you see your contents in the back seat and food wrappers on the dashboard, and you've got lots of parking tickets that are unpaid. And the police pull up. You see the flashing lights come up, and you get your car gets impounded, and you find yourself on city transit, because the city you live in has a program for the homeless where you can ride the transit at night and sleep on the buses. So you're on this bus, and the narrator tells you that there's a guy who likes to harass the homeless people and will steal your stuff. So you've got your backpack on the floor by your side, and they tell you that if he approaches you, just stare at him and he'll walk away. So you sort of look over your right shoulder, and there he is glaring at you, and you just stare at him for a few seconds, and eventually he walks away. And then you can point at the other occupants on the bus and get their backstory about how they became homeless. After that 9-minute experience, it was brief. I had the same feeling I get, after coming out of a movie that's really thought-provoking, and I felt completely immersed in my own thoughts, trying to process that whole experience. It's really quite profound. So, you know, embodied cognition, or being able to experience what it's like to be someone different, they call that the Proteus effect, has a profound effect on perception, much greater than anything that you could achieve through conversations in a classroom. Really quite interesting. The Proteus effect, by the way, is, you know, I'll give you an example. You know that expression, when you feel good, you look good? That's Proteus effect. When I'm Rob Theriault walking through the shopping mall, I feel like regular guy Rob Theriault walking through the shopping mall. But when I'm in my uniform with my partner, I feel like a person of authority, a person who's a professional, a person worthy of respect and recognition. That's the Proteus effect. And when you take on a different avatar who looks different, taller, shorter, fatter, different ethnicity, someone on the autism spectrum, you feel different. Your self-perception is different. Really quite powerful. Lastly, I want to talk about probably the most exciting area for virtual reality, which we can't replicate in a webinar or a screencast, and that's simulation of virtual reality. Now, there are two types of agency in virtual reality. Agency means being able to do things. So there's local agency where you can pick up things and assemble things and move things and throw things if you want to. The one on the left is from a company called UBSim, and it's a nursing simulation. And the one on the right is a surgical simulation, and they both have local agency, which means you're doing steps in a procedure. And the research has shown that when you do steps in a procedure, you learn them quite effectively, and it translates into better performance in the lab, in the hospital, and shorter response time. So I'll give you an example. The one you're looking at the right is there was a randomized control trial involving first and second year medical students. So they weren't surgical residents yet, and they were putting a nail in a tibial shaft fracture. And what they did was they measured the percentage of steps done correctly in the standardized learning versus virtual reality. And they found that the percentage of steps done correctly was 63% in VR versus, so when they were both tested sort of in the lab, 63% VR versus 25% in analog. The knowledge was also higher in the VR group, 50% versus 11%, which is quite powerful, quite remarkable. So there may be an opportunity in the not too distant future to be able to learn skills like the sequence of vital signs, head-to-toe assessments, Glasgow coma scales, etc., in virtual reality that may, I'm hoping, translates into improved performance in the lab, shorter time needed in the lab. And if everyone had a headset and was at home, they could be doing this right now. The one on the bottom left is interesting. This is from a company called Health Scholars, and it's ACLS and PAL scenarios. And there's no local agency in the sense that you're not doing anything with your hands, but they have global agency, which means that whatever you do or command affects the outcome. And what that means is, so you're standing there with a headset, you've got a dead guy on the bed, you've got a team of people, and they have an EMS version. And each team member has a name tag on them, and you basically just bark out orders at them. So it uses voice recognition and artificial intelligence. And so you call out, you say, Aaron, can you start an IV? Fatima, can you give a milligram of epinephrine IV? So it uses voice recognition, artificial intelligence, and you're interpreting rhythms on the monitor. You're getting someone to check for pulse. You're getting someone to do chest compressions, and they have sort of chest pain, STEMI simulations, and then a whole host of cardiac arrest simulations. And so there's a doc, an emergency doc, and maybe one of you knows him. He's by the name of Tim Cobold. He's in Columbia, Missouri. And he is training his residents in ACLS and PALS using virtual reality. And he's randomized students to mannequin versus virtual reality. So it'll be interesting to see the results of that study. The one on the right is a communication simulator. So patient communication simulator, and it's purely voice recognition and artificial intelligence. And this is for practicing history taking. So you walk into a hospital room, you look at a chart, this is Valerie who has a headache, and you can have a conversation with them. You'll say, hi Valerie, I'm Rob, I'm a paramedic student. I understand you've got a headache today. And she'll say, yeah, it's really bad. And I'll say, when did your headache start? I've had it for 4 weeks. And is it worse today? I woke up with it 2 hours ago and it's really bad, so I came to the hospital. And I'll say, on a scale of 0 to 10, how bad is the pain? She'll say, it's really bad. It's about a 7 out of 10. And I can ask her about her medical history, her medications, her allergies. It's really something else. Probably the biggest barrier to adoption of virtual reality right now is lack of content. So we don't have enough content. And number two, the cost. But you can send me an email. We can talk about that offline if you like. Happy to share everything I know about virtual reality. It's a really interesting area, and I'm hoping that some of you will start exploring virtual reality, and happy to explore it with you if you're interested. So just to wrap up, in summary, what I want to say is, number one, start simple. So take one technology. Webcast is probably the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to immersive remote teaching. Learn how to do that, learn how to engage your students. Just acknowledge the fact that while you're talking, some students are going to be making coffee or walking the dog or on social media or doing something else. So asking them questions verbally using voice over IP or bringing up quizzes or allowing them to draw on the screen or move objects is probably the best way to engage them. But it's a challenge. Those of you who do it now, you know what a challenge it can be. So interactivity is the key. And lastly, I just want to say virtual reality has incredible potential, and I'm hoping some of you will start to explore it now in its early days. This is important for two reasons. Number one, getting an understanding of what it is and what its potential is. Number two, communicating with companies and helping them to understand what our pedagogical needs are and what our cost thresholds are. Because I've had a lot of talk with companies and told them, you know, the cost of that, it's not going to happen. Just ain't going to happen. And a lot of them are really receptive to it. There's one company, they have a beautiful product, and they said it's $9,000 USD per year. And you know the Canadian dollar is only worth 70 cents on the American dollar rate. So $9,000 a year. And I said, there's not a snowball's chance in the middle of summer in Florida that we're going to be able to pay that kind of money. I said, how about 1,000? And I said that just as a joke. I didn't want to insult the poor guy, but he said, well, how about 2,500? And I said, okay, let me talk to my dean about it. So finally, I just want to say thank you. And this is some of my contact information, my two Twitter accounts, paramedic_tutor and edtechmedic. And there is a handout available and some resources you can connect to with the QR code at the back or the hyperlink from the PDF. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate you tuning in and giving us that presentation. So we did have some technical difficulties with the number of people that were allowed into this webinar. So if you were among the group that you had a class and you were hoping to get everyone in the class in, or you were having some sort of technical difficulties with somebody that you know was not able to get into this webinar, please feel free to distribute this recording to them. An email will go out to everybody with a recording of the webinar that will go to everyone, and you guys can send it out. We also have a NAEMSE YouTube page where we have our recorded webinars and everything. So again, I apologize if you know anyone who was affected by the technical difficulties. I'm sorry about that. But I do appreciate everybody taking the time to tune in and for everybody sticking with us through that. Robert, are you interested in doing some Q&As? I saw a lot of these questions that were sent in look like they have kind of some long answers that maybe it would be best if people just contact you separately. For instance, going over how to use iSimulate online or
Sure.
things like that. So if you're interested in doing that, I'm more than happy to stick through. If you'd like to talk through those types of things, if you want to go through the questions, or we can wrap up.
Yeah, I'm trying to see the questions. Okay, I see the questions now. Okay, let me just go from the top, sir. Not sure if I can answer some of these questions, but okay, this is oh no, this is the poll questions. How do I find the questions from the chat room, Nate?
There should be a panel just called questions here.
I see the chat panel, but I don't actually see any questions in there. Let's see.
Here we go. I'm assigning you questions. Maybe you can see them. I'm
Yeah,
through here.
sure.
And,
Yeah, you go ahead and read the questions and I'll try to answer them.
yeah, I mean, if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them into the questions window and I'll be able to see them. Right now, currently, what I'm seeing are what are the rules for teaching NEMTBB?
I'm afraid I have no idea.
Okay, that's totally okay. And then the other, it says, can you go over slowly how you use iSimulate online? But I suppose if you aren't prepared to do a full walkthrough, if you have any tips about using iSimulate online or anything you'd like to say to the how you're able to apply that, that would be great.
Yeah, so there's an application called Reflector, and there's a student version and a teacher version, and you can get that on a tablet and on your desktop or your laptop. And I use Reflector for moving iSimulate to my computer. I do the same with DartSim. So that's a short answer. I'll see if I can create a link to that information in my resources page.
Great. Another question. This individual has to do labs via Zoom, and they're wondering if there's a virtual reality simulation or somehow something that can work with Zoom if you're forced to use that particular software.
Oh, that's a good question. So there's a new application that just came out a couple of weeks ago called Spaces, and it works with Zoom and GoToWebinar and a few other platforms that allows you to be in virtual reality and the students to be on a Zoom screen. But I think it has limited functionality in terms of demonstrating things for lab because you have an avatar. So you have to get pretty clever with the labs. That's a tricky part. One of our faculty teaches an ambulance operations course, and part of their final testing is to do a circle check on an ambulance. Well, a circle check on a car is fairly close, about as close as you're going to get. So she had the students do circle checks on their personal cars and send the video in. So you know, have to get clever with that. But I'll just come back to the subject of virtual reality. We don't have really enough. There's almost non-existent applications for new students in EMS in virtual reality where you've got local agency, where you're doing things repetitively. That's one of the things that we desperately need. And as you might imagine, virtual reality training is the funding is coming from surgery, it's coming from nursing. Paramedicine is a relatively small profession by comparison. So this is why we need to get in there and talk with developers and see what they can develop for us.
Awesome, thank you. And this next question has to do with YouTube videos. Their system will not let us use an interactive class except that doesn't use YouTube videos. What can they do to try and ease their fear of problems not using YouTube?
So they're not able to use YouTube.
The way it's worded, I believe they have to use YouTube.
Oh, they have to use YouTube.
They don't use anything that's not YouTube.
Okay, so you can actually make, there are functions to allow you to make YouTube videos interactive. The EduCanon and PlayPosit, the interactive applications that I mentioned before, they simply use YouTube hyperlinks. So you go into that platform and you put a hyperlink, a URL into that platform, and then you embed questions in it. So I don't know if that's helpful or even doable. But you need a paid account to be able to track all of your students, so to put all your students' names in there. And of course, you know, because of privacy issues, you have to get your students' permission. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that's probably the best I can do with that question.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful. And so this one's sort of related to VR. I'm not sure. This may be application specific, depending how you choose to use VR applications. But they're curious about editing settings and scenarios in VR, and I would assume that this leads into, can we do anything we want?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a virtual reality application called SimX, so S-I-M, big X. And one of the co-founders, Dr. Andre Tyler, is an emerged physician from Los Angeles. And with that, he and I met in virtual reality, and he ran me through 4 resuscitations, which was a lot of fun. And what he did was he ran the scenarios from his laptop. He was the voice of the patient, and he adjusted vital signs on the fly. So like a high fidelity simulator, there are virtual reality programs where you can create your own scenarios using existing avatars, or you can use standardized patients. So the answer is yes. The cost is really high. I think their product is over 30 grand annually. So you'd have to be really, really serious about doing this. My advice with virtual reality is start small, start cheap, explore it, go to the trade conferences where you can actually experience SimX and Oxford Medical Simulations, so those other ones. So yeah, it is doable. There is an authoring tool in the background for some of these. Like for example, if I'm looking at an American-based virtual reality simulator, I've got to change some of the drug names to Canadianize them. Some of the things like blood sugar is in millimoles for us. So a normal blood sugar would be 4 to 6 millimoles per liter, whereas yours is decagrams per liter, I think. So yeah, there are some authoring tools.
Great, thank you very much. Let's see, this last question, I'll try to word it in a way that can be general, but this individual may benefit more of just reaching out separately. But so this individual uses PowerPoints to convert it to MP4s, and then they use that over Zoom. They also supplement with Facebook. But they're curious about how we can do scenarios or hands-on practicals virtually to be more interactive. If this is the type of thing where maybe you've kind of already answered that anecdotally, then that's up to you. But and they also supplement, with Schoology.com. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Schoology.com, but I'm a little puzzled by the idea of creating MP4s and broadcasting them on Zoom, unless they're short videos, clips of, say, assessments and what the expectation is. But one of the options, I suppose, is on Zoom, you could have a student who performs a head-to-toe assessment on something in the house, and you know, the instructor can view that and provide some feedback. But we're in such a bad situation here. It's so difficult to you know, replicate what you would normally do in a lab online at this point. So I don't have a wealth of ideas around that. But what I would say is, to your point, I think it's important to create a peer learning network, and NAEMSE is a good example of a peer learning network where you can reach out to other educators and find out what they're doing, and you know, you might be able to come up with some brilliant ideas. As my former dean used to say, do your R&D, research and duplicate. So if you're able to get ideas from other faculty, that's will help tremendously.
Yeah, thank you. Very helpful, and I believe that's everyone's questions that have come through that have not been answered yet. And to your point about the peer network, one thing that NAEMSE does actually have right now, we're kind of trying to get off the ground because it works best with member participation. But on our website and on our Facebook, we have discussion groups and forums and stuff where you guys can go. Any articles, any resources that you have that you find helpful, feel free to post them in there, share them with everyone. We're trying to just get information out to as many people as possible for free as right now that we can. So if you guys have anything that has helped you, or even just things that you guys are doing, feel free to go ahead and post those. We have our Facebook page, our website has a discussion forum, so there are places you can go to go ahead and get this information out. Obviously, resources like Rob Theriault's Twitter pages, and contact information for NAEMSE and Rob, that will all be emailed out to everybody as soon as this webinar is concluded. So there are ways for everyone to reach out. I definitely encourage people to share whatever you have. I mean, obviously, this is a very unprecedented situation that we're in. So the best thing that we can do is, if you find something good, go ahead and tell everyone about it. So we have those resources available. If anyone has anything you'd like to share, please feel free to utilize those. Rob, did you have anything else that you wanted to get in before we go ahead and wrap this up and send out the recording?
No, I just want to wish everyone good health and stay safe, and be careful out there if you're on the road.
Yep. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and thank you for taking the time to be here.